that I'm blessed. It's a few L's and millions, so turn that loss to a...
Jo Weatherford, welcome to the show, the Father Alchemist. And I started this, really, it's a show for entrepreneurs and a show about mental health. So I think we're probably in good company. And, for those of you that don't know Jo Weatherford, her tagline is from Playboy Playmate to Professor, yes, and really works now in mental health and in psychology.
Yeah, coaching, counseling world, yes.
Okay. So tell us, those are two very different backgrounds. How did you get started going into that profession?
Which one, the Playboy or the professional counselor?
Let's be honest. What people really are curious about is, how did you become friends with Hugh Hefner?
Well, it was funny because I never wanted to be a model. It wasn't like that was my focus, but I was in college and I was a broadcast journalist. And so I had a great career. I was actually co-hosting a show on a local NBC affiliate. Like I really wanted to do hard news. That was my passion. I was on a great trajectory.
Okay.
And then I met a girl who was working for Playboy. And it was one of those, hey, come with me. Let's do a test shoot. And, I had modeled at that point, obviously, but it was quite a leap to go from what I had been doing, which had been more fashion, to now come and take your clothes off.
Yeah.
It was such a shock to the system. But so I met this girl. She introduced me to Playboy. They offered me lots of opportunities and I ran with it. And that's really how it happened.
Were you hesitant at all with it? Or was it, did you sort of feel confident about the situation going into it?
I knew that I wanted to have a legit broadcast career. So my hesitation with it was more about, I don't want this to ruin me professionally. So I was very smart. I shot under different aliases all the time. Like I didn't want to become well known. I wanted to get paid. I wanted to have the experience, and then I wanted to be able to move on with my life. I got a real rude awakening. Obviously, that is not how life works. And I thought I was going to be in the industry, get out, and then go work for a major news network. And within 5 minutes, they knew exactly what I had been doing. And they told me, they go, the fact that America, could see you naked, nobody is ever going to take you seriously.
I feel like a lot has changed around that, right? I mean, you don't think so?
I think that it's more culturally appropriate to say that it has, but I still think there is a huge stigma against women and sexuality. It's the Madonna horror complex, right? It's like, we want to say that we support sexual freedom within women, but there is a deep-seated cultural hatred against it. And quite honestly, I buried my past for 20 years. I mean, I became a professor. That was my nightmare, that anybody would ever know that I'd shot for Playboy. I mean, can you imagine? I'm standing up in front of college students and they can go online and see me naked. I would have never been able to have been a professor. So I buried it. Hit it.
You just think they lose respect for you at that point, or you think that they are distracted by what they're looking at?
Yeah, it would have been both.
Okay.
And it would have been about me being naked instead of about the content, which is fair. There's consequences to our actions. So I was really protective. Nobody knew. I would have never talked about my past. And it wasn't until I went through a divorce a few years ago that my ex-husband, of course, that was the first thing he did when I left was tell everyone. But he really set me free, because that was such a difficult thing to have to hide. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed of it either. And it is a part of my past. And it was held over my head for so long in so many ways. When he thought he was hurting me by telling everyone, nobody cared.
Sometimes it's the best thing you can do, right? It's like our secrets keep us sick.
Yes.
And the more that we bury it, the more that we hide it, the more we try to avoid that part of us coming out. I think we start to struggle internally with who we are, our identity, self-confidence, self-love. And once that shit comes out, and it doesn't have to be it could be sexuality, it could be an addiction, it
Yeah.
could be really anything that you're keeping secret. But once that shit comes out, nobody can hold anything over your head at that point. And like you said, you're free.
Yeah, and I think too, one of the biggest things was, I used to co-own a martial arts school and I ran our kids program.
Oh.
And then of course I was, teaching at a university. So there were professional, consequences to that information coming out, where now, I'm free to that can be a part of my experience. People find it interesting. I can talk very openly about the sex industry and porn addiction and women and sexuality and intimacy and all of these topics. So it really, it now supports me, that part of my story, where before it was something I had to be afraid of. So yeah, I mean, when we are in a position to be able to own ourselves at that level, God, that freedom is good.
I think so much of it is perspective. I've struggled with addiction my entire life. I talk about it a lot. And when I first got clean and just put down all of the vices, I remember, I'm in the real estate industry. And so I remember thinking to myself, gosh, I'm in an industry that is so it's ingrained to like go do happy hours and go drink, and there's drugs involved in some cases. And, that's sort of the environment, right? Because you're networking. It's what, business people do. And so the immediate thought was like, my business is going to tank now that I'm not doing drugs.
Sure.
See, I thought that gave me an edge. It gave me the ability to communicate, to kind of let my guard down, to connect. And really, it was the exact opposite as what it was doing. But what I found is once I let that story go, I found that people were intrigued by it. It gave me an edge. I wasn't waking up hungover. I wasn't waking up with a cloudy head. I had an edge over my competition. And so my business actually flourished and I didn't have to ever worry about it. And the reality is I would show up to events and, I'd be holding a glass of water. Nobody ever asked me why I wasn't drinking alcohol.
Yeah.
So this was just a story I played out in my head.
Absolutely. I love that. I mean, I quit drinking 12 years ago and
Good for
nobody
you.
ever gives me a hard time,
Yeah.
And if they did, they wouldn't be in my space much longer,
No kidding. Yeah.
But it actually just never comes up.
Yeah.
And I experience the same thing where so often people are like, wow, tell me about that. They're intrigued. They think it's, there definitely is a revolution in that sense right now, where sobriety used to be this awful thing you had to hide in a basement, and talk about how awful and fucked up your life was. And now it's like there is actually a lot of people that do not even have addiction issues that are just choosing not to participate in that anymore. And it's trending and I love it. And it's really exciting to see people wake up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it really is. And I think so many more people struggle with addiction and they are continuing to keep it a secret because maybe they don't think there's a way out, or, it can be a very lonely place, right? I know what it's like to hide that shit from my wife, to hide it from my kids, to hide it from coworkers, to just live in that darkness, And I think what's so amazing about what you're doing is being able to be vulnerable, share your past about being a playmate and everything that was involved in that. And I think when you can speak with authenticity and vulnerability out loud and just allow people to, listen, it's not my business what people think of me. That's God's business.
Yeah.
Right? I don't need to worry about what they're thinking and how they're judging. But when you're vulnerable and openly share about that stuff, I think it gives others permission to maybe do the same in return. And I think it's, one person at a time, you can really heal that way.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And I love the word permission because it's true. As we own our story, as we own who we are and our shadows and our light and all of it, and we show up, that really is the energy of permission, where it's like, I'm not perfect and I never preach that I have anything mastered, but I will say about my experience is that I have insane grit, and I love challenges. I don't ask for them. I don't call in hardship, but when it arises, it's not just, I'm going to get through this, right? That's survival or resilience. I'll survive it. But I truly have been able to hijack my brain in such a way where it's like, this is my opportunity. This is my catalyst. This is where we're going next. Bring it, and
Dude, I love that. I just want to dive into that a little deeper because, being in an industry where it's really a bunch of entrepreneurs, right? Some are selling real estate, some are doing loans like me, but we're in an industry where, you've got to have that grit, and mindset is so critical. But how did you develop that? Like, are there any strategies or tactics that you could share with the audience on like what somebody might be able to do to I'm trying to think of how to say this, but to have your brain hijacked in such a way where you can just plow through these obstacles and not let them stop you?
Well, I don't recommend doing it the way I did it
Okay.
because, I'm like in jail or, coming out of a suicide attempt. Like, I've just got to find a way,
Yeah.
But for me, what allowed it was just stretching my capacity for pleasure and for pain, going from the depths of hell and addiction to then building the life that I have now, which it is, not free or absent of problems. But my love for myself and for my experience and for other people, it's like my capacity to hold both is so vast that when a challenge arises, it's the ability to hold both of those, competing emotions within me that allows me to then move in that direction. But what I will say for people is there's lots of ways. You don't need to hit a rock bottom or go through some awful thing and then rise out of it to be able to develop it. It's actually our friend Joe said this the other day, and I thought he explained it so well. When you're feeling anxious, just ask for more anxiety. Cool, it's here. Bring more of it. And so in these little moments, you can just say, hey, do whatever you need to do. Because when you understand that emotions are messages, they are either to help you regulate or to help you get out of a situation that you are not aligned with, or to help you be more congruent with your truth. When we feel anxiety, when we feel depression, it's like, this is who I am and this is who I want to be. And it's the space in between where those emotions arise, So we need to just let that fuel us into better alignment. So when you're anxious, bring more anxiety.
I love that. That's awesome. That's awesome. So what was it that first made you think, maybe there's something here? Like, and I want to dive into, if you're okay with it, some of the addiction stuff and maybe share some stories about that. But what made you realize, like, man, I think I have a gift for really helping coach people to get to the other side of this or deal with some of the trauma that they've had in the past and, become this vision that they have of themselves?
I think my ability to be non-judgmental was picked up in grad school, and then I just happened to retain information really well. So I was selected to start teaching, from my graduate program. And so I have no idea what I'm doing. They hand me a book and they're like, basically, go be a professor. And I'm like, all right, I'll figure out how to be a professor. But I didn't have any formal training. And what I would do is just go into the classroom, and I just had such an innate curiosity to know people's stories. And so we would sit there and we would be doing counseling, live in class. And it was truly just learning about one another. And then my ability to be vulnerable and share, I think also really inspired students to then do the same. You're talking about permission. It was like all of a sudden, the way that I was able to show up in my transparency allowed students to do the same. And we just had this beautiful symbiotic relationship where it's like, I'm not above you. I'm here to learn from you as well. And so through teaching, and then also working with clients and individuals that, whether I'm good at it or not, you'd have to ask them. But what I know about me is I genuinely have a passion for people and what they are going through. And I also know without a shadow beyond a doubt that healing is always possible. And you come from a similar place. And I think when you've been in the depths of hell and then you build a life like we have now, what makes us special and unique in a way is we've done it and we know what's possible. And that energetically gets picked up on. And it's important that we talk about where we came from so that people understand what's possible. And I say that with a lot of humility. I'm not up here trying to say like, some narcissistic perspective of do what I did. But no, it's like, no, I've been there.
So I want to talk a little bit about some of the addiction that you struggled with. And, when I think of addiction, I don't necessarily just think of drugs.
Yeah.
Right. For me, it's really sort of this, challenging, unstoppable obsession and compulsion, and that can show up in many different ways, right? It's
Yes.
like drugs are just the sort of masking the symptom of addiction. You know, it's why, and I'm not shitting on Alcoholics Anonymous. I think it's probably a great organization. But one thing I know about that organization is they tend to talk a lot about alcohol being the problem.
Yeah.
And I've always thought that that was curious because, okay, but what happens when you get rid of the alcohol? Like, you're still dealing with you no matter where you go. And so I think for some it is drugs. For me, it has been. I think for some, like you said, it's porn or sex addiction. It could be a shopping addiction. There's a number of ways that it can show up. How did it show up for you?
Yeah.
And
Well,
when? How old were you?
first of all, I love that because it's really important that we start talking about it differently. It's a distraction that becomes a compulsion, you know, and that can be lots of behaviors, lifestyles, addictions, substances. For me, it showed up when I was 11 or 12 and
Okay.
it was alcohol.
Okay.
So I grew up in a family with very high functioning alcoholics. Alcohol was always around. I went through a breakup, you know, my first heartache. And that's what I did. I went to the cabinet. I poured the worst jungle juice you could possibly imagine.
12?
Oh, God.
At 12 years old?
At 12.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Just a water glass full of like whatever. And I slammed it and I was like, I'm home. And it was just this instantaneous, like I found the reprieve that I've always been looking for. It's almost like if you've ever played chicken, you know, and you've got somebody on your shoulders and then you get too deep in the pool and the water's over your nose, but they're on you, so you're drowning. And it was like taking my first breath. It was like that level of reprieve.
Almost, would you say like a peace almost?
It was just, I mean, you're
You
just
felt
level
amazing.
10
Yeah.
and then poof.
So for me, it was heroin, it was OxyContin, it was any opiate that I could get my hands on was really sort of my, you know, my go-to. But I don't even know if it matters what the substance was. What I'm curious to know, and I don't know if you know the answer to this or if we'll ever know, but you know, you described it as like this. How did you say it? Something that turns into a compulsion.
A distraction.
A distraction that turns into a compulsion. And yet some people have that distraction, but they don't go, you know, try to find heroin.
Right.
Right. They go and exercise, or they go and mountain bike or snowboard, or they do something else to distract themselves. But what is it that you think causes some of us to reach for that numbing and that escape?
It's a great question, and it goes back to the nature versus nurture argument all the time. We know that genetics do play a factor into it. So if you have a genetic predisposition for addiction, then that can play out. But through epigenetics, we know that the environment is what determines whether or not a gene gets flipped on or off. So you may have two parents with the addictive gene, so you know that a child has it. If they are raised in a supportive environment, let's say those two parents have been in recovery, that child has their basic needs met, the parents are attuned to them, they are basically absent of trauma, they've developed, you know, coping skills, all the things, they're not going to become an alcoholic, right? So epigenetics, we know the environment is so critical. So you may have a genetic imprint for addiction, and that is important. I want to tell you about this study that really explains this beautifully. So they took a worm, right? And it's a Pavlovian study. They show a worm a light and then shock it, right? So then it jumps. They do that enough, and then they show the worm the light. They don't shock it, but it still jumps. So that's an ingrained behavior. I see a light, I jump. What's crazy is that worm had babies. They never once shocked the baby, but when that baby saw light, it jumped. So that's an ingrained pattern, right?
Yeah.
That happened 60 times, 60. That worm had babies, that worm had babies, that worm had babies 60 times before that innate response of I see the light and I jump was finally eradicated from the DNA. So
That's a crazy study.
It's crazy, and it's been repeated. And so I do think that there is a way we can look into our lineage and the way that, our ancestors behaved and everything else, where we go, how come some people go, okay, this doesn't feel good. I did this thing. I tried this. Oh, I got a little reprieve, but you know what? I'm going to find other coping mechanisms. And we're like, damn, this is it. I'm all in.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think there's some of that. I really do. And I think it's the brain. I think it's lack of coping mechanisms. I know for me, I'll just speak for myself. When I was 4 years old, I had a diary. I was a very weird kid. I never felt like I belonged on this earth. I always felt very much like it was an accident that I was here. And so I already had this melancholy around the world. I was very isolated. So for me, drinking just made sense. Like, I can look at my history. I was molested when I was 4. I fit all the criteria, and it makes perfect sense that I became an alcoholic.
Your parents were around, but you said they were high-functioning alcoholics.
Yeah, and my dad was an airline pilot, so he was actually physically gone quite a bit. And with my mother, she was wonderful, and her addiction didn't start until I was about 7. And so it was very confusing because I had this mother. She was, insane in her own ways. Like, I grew up in a home that demanded perfection. Like, I was a doll. I had to sit there, shut up, be perfect. I remember one time I got a B in 3rd grade and I was grounded for a month.
No
like,
kidding.
I had to be perfect. I had to look a certain way. I had to be good at athletics. And that's a lot of our experience, though, right? Like, I love you as long as. It's very much what we experience from our family. And we learn very early on that I need to become somebody different in order to earn love.
So you start putting on masks, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And for me, I got tired of wearing that mask. So here I am, I'm 12. I am sick of performing. I am tired of being emotionally responsible for an adult,
When did you realize they were addicts?
At about that time when I became one. Okay. And people go one of either way. Yeah, they either become the exact opposite or they become what they hate. And for me, I just dove right into it.
Yeah. Gosh. So from 12 on, it was alcohol. Did you get involved in anything else? Did the addiction show up in other ways for you?
I'm really fortunate. Opiates just have never been interesting to me. Like, I don't, I am an addict in every way, shape, or the form, whether it's, alcohol or sex or, give it to me. I want all of it all the time. And I have no off switch. Yeah. Thank God opiates were not that for me.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because I always think, thank God it wasn't alcohol for me. Right?
Yeah, right.
Well, you just, alcohol, you can go any corner and buy it. There's a little bit more of a barrier to get opiates.
Right.
Maybe not. I don't know. But, and so when did you, and where was this at the time? At 12, where were you living?
So I was in Arizona, in a small town, which didn't help either. And so I was able to finally convince my parents to send me to boarding school. So I ended up going to boarding school in Scottsdale, which was the best thing for me. And I was also a very high functioning alcoholic. So I graduated at 16, second in my class. My addiction was still going crazy. I was dealing MDMA at raves. I was a mess, but I could show up and I knew how to make teachers like me. And they wanted me to succeed and nobody wanted to believe I was as sick as I was. So I kind of created this persona that let me skate through. And I did the same thing in college. I was absolutely an alcoholic in college, but I made it to class. I got my work done. I was smart enough and interesting enough that I could just do the bare minimum and get through. But Thursday through Tuesday, I was lit. It was awful.
Knew, during this whole time, I'm struggling here. This is behind the scenes, you're living sort of this dark existence, or has it not quite set in yet that just really the depths of the addiction?
Because I don't really believe in denial. I know we can lie to ourselves to such a degree that we'll believe our own bullshit. But to me, denial surfaces because I don't want to have to admit it and then do something about it.
Sure.
But I think we know. When we're at an addicted level, we know. Yeah. And I never was in denial or wasn't very open with those closest to me about it. I'm like, I know I need help. And I was constantly trying to stop and I just couldn't, I mean, the cravings would come and I didn't have any other resources. And so.
And was this like you were waking up in the morning and drinking? I mean, how, because there's different versions of it, right? But so what was that? What was like the day to day for you?
I mean, certainly on the weekends, I would need to wake up and drink just to avoid DTs. I didn't hit it as hard during the week. I would have just maybe like 5 drinks at night.
For those that don't know what DTs are, do you
delirium
want to
tremors.
Yep.
So, when you think about something like alcohol, that's a depressant, a central nervous system depressant. So you're depressing your system and there is an equal and opposite reaction to everything. So as that depressant wears off, there is an explosion. And if you are not careful, that turns into seizures. So you're shaking and it's actually, you might want to die from heroin withdrawal, but you actually can die from alcohol and benzos. Coming off alcohol or Xanax or something like that too quickly is a death sentence.
Talk about an epidemic,
certain level.
Right? Like not just alcohol, but you look at the amount of benzos being prescribed right now, it's unbelievable. When I was younger, I was prescribed Klonopin.
Okay.
I had this really, I think I was 19 years old. I just got my first job. I just moved out. I was living with a buddy and I just remember thinking to myself, I'm literally going to die. I had some kind of crisis, panic attack. Like I was pacing around my apartment at the time in Sherman Oaks, California, where I was just like, I don't know what the fuck's happening, but I got to get somebody to take me to the hospital. I can't breathe. So I call my mom. My mom leaves work. She comes and gets me, takes me to the doctor. And it's this like 90-year-old doctor who is like, here, let me write you a prescription for Klonopin. And, I'm 19 years old or 20 years old at the time. And I think, I hadn't educated myself at that point. So in my mind, I'm just like, the doctor tells you to do something and you do it. Right. And so I did, and I was on Klonopin for a couple of years. And then I remember years later, I was dating a girl who was reading, like she found something online where she was reading all of the side effects or potential side effects from benzodiazepines. And I'm not joking. I mean, it was literally, she listed 100 of the counter effects to this medicine. And it was essentially creating the exact opposite of what the pill is prescribed to help you with in the first place.
Yeah.
Like it's creating the anxiety. And, your left arm's going to fall off and your dick's going to shrivel up and everything else that you can imagine. And you're like, why the fuck would I ever want to take that stuff? But so many of us are addicted to it.
If a child is having an epileptic seizure, you give them that medicine and it will stop the seizure. It's a beautiful medicine, right?
Sure.
Like, I mean, we are talking acute crisis is when it should be used, not like, oh, wow, you're not coping well with life. Here, take this daily. That's insane. And with any pharmaceutical, what I will say is this, if there was a happy pill, we'd all be on it. You know what I mean? So if somebody needs medication as a last resort for a temporary, let's just let somebody get to baseline so that we can have some other natural interventions, by all means. And I will say this too, if medication increases your quality of life, do it. That's what I always advocate for. And the side effects, and now we got to have you on this medication to help you process this medication. Oh, and then it doesn't work. And then we got to add in this mood stabilizer and all this shit. And the sexual side effects, the weight gain, the suicidality. I mean, it's really, really important that we explore every other option first. And that is a last case resort. And that's not what we do. We do 15-minute consults. Somebody is in with some sort of pharmaceutical, they write a script and then they'll check in, once a month. Are you hearing voices? Whatever. It's not therapy. They're just asking you 4 questions, sending you home with another script. And what's really dangerous to me about that is not just the actual physical side effects of medication, but also the illusion of hope. You tell somebody this is going to make you better and it doesn't. That's when people can really get hopeless.
I've always thought that the doctor-patient relationship was just sort of just kind of a racket, like the amount of times I have manipulated doctors to give me what I want is astounding.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I almost feel like the medical professional expects it because that's their protocol, right? Like what else they're not trying to treat the symptom,
Yeah.
right? They're masking it by writing a prescription, and what else can they do? Because that's how they've been trained. So it's almost like the whole system is fucked, and it's set up to just kind of perpetuate. And don't get me started on like the whole pharmaceutical industry and how that all works. But what is it that that finally made you break down and go, I need to fucking I need to change this. I need to do something different. I need to get help. Like, what was that moment like? Was it a huge explosion, or was it just accumulation of a lot of time where you're like, I don't want to live like this anymore?
A lot of it was, I don't want to live like this anymore. And as I said, I knew I was sick, and I was constantly, just what I knew I didn't want to do was go to a traditional rehab again and it not work. Here's a 90-day Minnesota model treatment center where I'm paying $100,000 and I'm going to AA, which should be free, and I'm not getting better. I knew I didn't want to do that again. So I was very much open to something coming into my experience that I thought would work. I had tried AA. It was not for me at all. I tried therapy, and same thing, like you talk about just bullshitting the medical professionals. I would sit in therapy and I would have these people wrapped around my fingers, which is so messed up because I was going to them for help, but I'm like, I'm winning therapy.
But
they don't
winning,
think I'm sick, but I also wasn't getting better at all.
Yeah.
So I was just blowing money. Nothing was working. So I was already in a space of like, I am open to something else. There's some alternative form of treatment. What actually happened was I was raped, and it was the first time I ever felt compassion for myself. I had never felt sorry for myself. My go-to was always, you're a piece of shit, you caused this, whatever. For whatever God reason, it happened to me, and I was like, that wasn't my fault. That shouldn't have happened to me. And I felt really sad for myself. And I had this moment of opening of like, wow, maybe I'm worth fighting for. Maybe there's something here that I actually deserve better than this.
Has that, now looking back on that, has it somehow given you a perspective of like almost being, it's hard for me to even say this because I couldn't imagine what that must be like to go through, but like almost this perspective of being grateful that you were raped because of the fact that it gave you the ability to have some compassion for yourself, which then changed the trajectory of your entire life.
I'm not grateful for the rape. I'm grateful for the compassion of the rape. And I really appreciate your courage to even like really go there, because it is such a delicate conversation. When we talk about personal responsibility, when we talk about, finding the beauty within pain, these are very sensitive subjects. And, you can come off very, very much like as victim blaming a lot of the ways that I speak about this. And it's, what I firmly believe is nobody should ever be victimized. That is never our fault, but healing is our responsibility. So that happened to be the catalyst that allowed me, for whatever reason, to feel compassion. And I say that with a lot of grace. I remember I was at Auburn University speaking about this, and a young woman came up to me afterwards and she goes, I was raped and I have never felt compassion. So whenever I share this story, I always like to say too that if that has happened to you and you haven't felt it, you haven't felt it yet. Because truth is always true, whether you believe it or not. And the reality is you deserve compassion around that. So it will be available. It will be felt eventually. And so just keep allowing yourself to catch up to that truth. Because the problem with something like rape is energy cannot be created or destroyed, right? So this person violates and perpetrates somebody else. So the energy of shame is there. It cannot be. I cannot violate another human without shame being present. The problem is the perpetrator goes, I'm not going to pick it up, and turns and walks away, and the victim is left to assume it. So you are assuming their shame, and then of course the dialogue and the shame and everything else that you were trying to interpersonally then digest on top of it. So for me, I am grateful for the compassion that came after that. And I'm exceptionally grateful that Shadle, an aversion therapy program, still existed back then. It's since closed and I'm devastated. And I'm always looking for investors because we got to get this going again because it's what saved my life.
Shadle?
So it was an aversion therapy hospital in Seattle, the only one of its kind. And aversion therapy, you walk in a little room, they inject you with something that causes flu-like symptoms.
Okay.
And then they give you a water glass full of Ipecac to drink. So like you have kids, right? So it used to be if your kid ate something poisonous, you give them a tablespoon of Ipecac.
Okay.
It will induce vomiting. So I drank a water glass full of it. And then they would just start pouring you drinks, 20 drinks. You're drinking, vomiting. I'm talking like The Exorcist. Never been sicker in my entire life. Yeah.
So it's interesting you're bringing this up. There's a lot of new alternative treatments out there that are being explored, some of which are now beginning to become legal here, some aren't. Do you know anything about combo?
So I actually do psychedelic therapy with my clients. I'm very familiar with it. I do not administer combo. I have had it administered millions of times on me. I'm a huge proponent of it. The peptide liver flush that it causes is phenomenal. Yes.
Cool. I'm just learning about some of this stuff. Combo and ibogaine is another one.
Yes.
That is, I think, from a village in West Africa. It's a... Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so that's a bark that is ingested and it is gnarly. I've done a lot of psychedelic therapy myself. I recently did iboga. So iboga is the natural form of ibogaine. Ibogaine is synthesized iboga. So I did the natural. I did it in Nicaragua with a shaman, and it was 24 hours of hell.
Okay.
Yeah. So what's different about that medicine is it really brings you into the human experience. Like if you were to take something like ayahuasca or mushrooms or something else, you have a very outward spiritual experience. Ibogaine drops you into yourself. And most people have the same experience where it's like you go through a file cabinet of all your shame, all the shitty things you've done. It's like doing the most intense 12-step work you've ever done at the highest level.
What?
And,
in like a 24-hour period.
Yeah, and you just lay there paralyzed and you can't do anything
shit.
And you just got to hear about what a piece of shit you are. It's brutal.
But I've heard that it has, and my numbers might be off, but like a 70 or as much of as a 90% efficacy rate. Is that true to helping with addiction?
I'm hesitant on those statistics, but I know of all the things that are available, that is the one that we need the most research on. And that's why I did it, is I wanted to understand what the experience was like, because I was seeing the research going, oh my God, this is unbelievable, especially for opiates, because it can eradicate the withdrawal. So being on opiates, taking away the withdrawal, and then having this intense process, it resets your dopamine receptors. So if you need 8 buckets full of dopamine to function, it like clears out 5 buckets. Now you only got 3. So your compulsion is less. The other thing it does, so after listening to your negative thoughts for that long, for 24 hours, it was a couple days later, I was sitting on the beach and I just went, oh my God, my head is quiet. So there's a second voice running all the time. Oh, she looked at you weird. Why did you wear that? Yeah, and that voice really does a lot with addiction. It speaks addiction through that second voice.
Sure.
Well, you've been doing so good. It's only one. You're going to look weird if you don't just grab that drink. You're fine. You've had 6 months sober. Come on, it's just one. So the second voice, I was like, it's gone. It's almost like listening to it for 24 hours. It finally just shut up.
Yeah.
So that's been since May. It hasn't come back. And I'm like, from a treatment standpoint, that's unbelievable.
That's unbelievable. I've heard nothing but phenomenal things about it. I am scheduled to go through that experience in November.
Beautiful.
So we'll see. But I haven't heard anything negative from it. So I don't know.
The pushback on it is you can die. So it's, for people in recovery or that are are currently using, they need to be medically supervised.
Sure.
Especially if there's any comorbidities such as, HIV, Hep C, anything like that. It is a very intense process. And so there needs to be medical supervision, but that is the pushback. Oh, you could die. And I'm like, you know what else is dangerous? Heroin.
Yeah, no kidding.
Fentanyl.
Right,
you can die from that too.
Right.
So I think
What is it that would cause you to die from it?
that I would need to go. It's heart. It's rapid heart, and your heart basically, you can stroke, and there's a lot of different things that can happen when your body is going through such an intense process. But having medical staff there and doing the pre-screening and detoxing appropriately, there are protocols in place. There's a clinic in Tijuana that I know does a beautiful job of really getting people, as healthy as humanly possible before having this experience. So I do believe that there are medical protocols that can protect people, but we need to be looking at this as actual treatment. I mean, it's a pretty profound medicine, and I can't wait to hear how it goes for you in November.
I'll share the whole experience with you for sure.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your ideal client, somebody that would want to talk to you and maybe be coached or get some help through your practice.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I work with people who are struggling with addiction, that they're below the line of needing treatment. So they're noticing I'm drinking too much, or I used to just do blow once in a while, a couple of Vegas trips. Now it's becoming more regular, and it's starting to impact my life in a negative way. So I'm not at the point of needing treatment yet, but I'm at the point that I don't like my relationship with this substance and I need help.
Okay.
So that is some of my clients. Ironically, the other group I work with is CEOs, and most of them are transitioning out of business, but they've been exceptionally successful. They're all males. And what makes them so good in business has made them not so effective in their marriages and at home. So I do a lot of intimacy coaching. And like I said, when appropriate, I will do medicine work with those individuals therapeutically. I really, really love working with high performers because I get it. I know how their brain works, and they take action. And when somebody commits, and has that history of success and really shows up and does the work, that's why I like coaching over counseling. I'm action oriented. I want to be moving towards the goal. That doesn't mean we don't process trauma, and that's important. We need to process and move that energy, but it's equally important not to sit in it. And I see this a lot in recovery, and I'm sure you do as well. People can almost get addicted to healing. There's always the next thing, and it's like, no, live, enjoy your life. You did it. Good job. Move forward. So I don't believe in staying stuck, and in that victim consciousness, we do not heal. And so empowerment is key to anytime you're working with somebody, any kind of therapy. It's like, you've got to know you've got you. And then here's this person supporting.
By the way, I love this perspective and approach, and I'm not here to shit on any other sort of solution for people that has worked. But it's a different sort of process than maybe a 12-step program. And the one thing that I've always struggled with 12 steps, or Narcotics Anonymous is an organization I went to and spent some time in, is sort of this constant reminder that you're always saying I'm an addict. And there's just something about that for me. And I don't know if other people have felt the same way too, but it's like, if I have to constantly say I'm an addict, to me, it just feels like, well, how am I healing if I'm constantly telling myself that I'm this person where I've had this fucking horrible experience that I want to get away from, but I have to keep saying it. I understand that the benefit of doing that is getting humble and just kind of admitting that I've got a problem. But what do you think that does for somebody? And it sounds like there's a different solution.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about our energetic bodies being water, words are vibration. So, it's called spelling for a reason. Words matter. We are literally casting spells. So to say I am are the two most powerful words in the world. So to say every day, day in and day out, I am an alcoholic, whoa. No, I 100% would never say that. I might say I am in recovery from alcohol, but to say I am that, Absolutely not. I mean, we can take that to any disorder. Oh, I am bipolar. Really? Because I can't draw your blood and then tell you you're bipolar. I can say that when you respond to stress, you exhibit these symptoms and they're very real. But I am. That's like, when you have a kid, you want to see them as whole and beautiful and functional, and you're going to speak to them as that version of themselves. You're not going to talk to them like an idiot. You know what I mean? So it's like we do that with people all the time, with employees. It's like, I want to speak to the highest, most evolved version of you and let you rise into it. And let me hold that energetically until you understand how to embody it. So to see somebody as sick and broken and that all the time, I mean, I went to a meeting to support a friend. And there was a person that had 25 years sober that was like still telling the same story. And I was like, I would fucking die. I would rather be drunk than sitting here 25 years later. And I say that jokingly, but kind of not.
Yeah.
I'm not even kidding.
I see both sides, but their side is, well, yeah, but it's kept me clean for 25
But are you happy? Because you asked the question earlier, so you take the alcohol away and then what? To me, it's like, no, I want people to heal. I want them to do what you did, to go, oh my God, I'm going to lose my edge in business. I'm so scared. Nope, flourished. Oh, my relationships are amazing. Like, white knuckling it and just not doing the thing is not the answer. Yes, that's great. Good job. Step one. That's a Band-Aid on a compound fracture. Real healing is falling in love with yourself so that you walk into a room and you don't need it. You know what I mean? You know who you are, and it's like that's available, and that's what I want people to understand. And again, I'm not shitting on AA. It's saved millions of lives. We do not have affordable care for people, and AA is something out there that has helped millions of people get sober. So I will forever sing its praises, and there has to be alternatives to that.
That's a great way of saying it. Yeah. Where can people find you?
I'm very active on Instagram. They can also find me on Facebook, Jo Weatherford, and then joweatherford.com or recoveryremix.com.
I like that. Recovery Remix. How did you come up with that name?
I don't remember. It was just, we were talking about wanting to have an alternative platform for 12 steps. So I was like, what about 12-step remix? And then I was like, oh, I'm totally going to get sued. So we got to come up with something else. And so that's sort of what we came up with. But, that's me and that's you. And that's a lot of people that we have in common. We don't use, but that doesn't mean we lost our edge. As a matter of fact, that's how we found it. And like, I just want people to hear this, that you can have such an amazing, full, beautiful life without that thing. And it's not about stopping the substance. It's about who you become as you stop the substance, and it's like knowing that, understanding, like coming from the depths of hell and then being so grateful for the life that you can create. It's a beautiful, amazing gift.
You can tell that you're super passionate about it. You're very well spoken and articulate with that passion. And I just want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you got it. That was fun.
Every time that I see a limit, I push right past it. Don't care if you got here first, the one to win is the last one standing. Say my life is like luck, nah, I had to plan it. The way I work is out of this earth. I can feel the momentum. Need it all, no fractions. Dream it, then I gotta have it in the booth like Tom Cruise. Whole lot of